So turtles give birth to ninja turtles as their shelf. So turtles give birth to ninja turtles as their shelf exposes. Oh, okay. Yes, that's right.
That's evolution
Evolution,
right there.
but that's it. But that's what. Well, that's how they think evolution is. They think it's Pokemon evolution, but they would say, well, they're still turtles.
Yeah, there's still X is always every time anyone ever says, "Well, there's still X," what that means is they don't understand how evolution works at a fundamental
Correct.
level, and
Yeah.
therefore, like, you need to stop having a conversation about like the evidence for evolution and whatnot, and you need to back up and just talk about like what is evolution, like, starting in like middle school biology level with like, okay, so DNA, here's what DNA is, because that's
Mhm.
the kind of level of like confusion that we're at. Anytime anyone says, "Well, it's still a turtle," yeah,
Yeah.
it'll always be a turtle.
Yeah, when you can show them how microevolution works, they want to make a distinction between macro, but they can't make a distinction between macro, and they'll come right out and admit that they fully accept that speciation happens. Get them to understand, okay, so this is how we have one original dog, for example, speciated into all of these different species of dogs, not just different subset of domestic dogs, but different species of dogs as well. You accept it all, and all of this is evolution. Yeah, but that's not real. Well, how is it not real evolution? Because it didn't turn into something else. Yeah, it
Yeah.
never does.
hmm It's like there's this law of monophilitism. Is that it? No, that can't be it. Monophily. That's it. That's what that
Yes,
is.
monophily.
Got it.
The laws of monophily and biodiversity.
Pinworm writes Mount Rushmore live stream. Thank you. Well, thank you. I appreciate everyone hanging out with us tonight. That's awesome. Diem answers in Gajira Wing writes Godzillasaurus ate watermelons just like T-Rex. Yeah, that's a good question.
So, if we mean the Godzillasaurus infant from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, it definitely ate plants. I don't remember specifically if it ate watermelon, but I do believe there were fruit in the enclosure that they kept it in the first part of the movie. So I would go ahead and say that yes, Godzillasaurus from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla probably would have eaten
Well, as we all know,
watermelons.
watermelons before the floods grew on tall trees,
Yeah,
as
obviously.
we all know.
It's only because of sin that they grow along the ground.
That's
But
right.
I also love that they always portray a modern watermelon when we know that just like 3 centuries ago, watermelons looked
Right.
almost nothing like this.
It's the
And
Ray
it's
Comfort problem all over again. Yeah.
yeah, the
It was
banana is
fun.
perfectly designed by humans. Yep, that's
One of the movies that I saw most often as a kid growing up was the 1969 Son of Godzilla,
Oh, yeah.
where instead of Godzillasaurus, it
Hmm.
was named Minya, and Minya could talk
yeah.
when he shrunk, because Minya could somehow change his size so that he could be human size, where he could have a 10-year-old human friend to talk to. And then sometimes he would grow and he would be something like 100 feet tall, which is only a quarter as tall as his dad was, something like that. Because they said in the original movie, in the Japanese version, they said that Godzilla was 50 meters tall, or was it 60 meters? I forget.
I believe it originally was 50, and then it has gone up for the most part ever
Yeah,
since.
it was 50 meters tall, but in the 1956 adaptation with Raymond Burr, they said that Godzilla is over 400 feet tall. And it took until you get to G14 before Godzilla starts approaching that size.
Yeah.
But when you look at the movies, he's never that big.
Generally speaking, Godzilla is big enough such that the tallest buildings around him are roughly the same size as he is. That's how you can usually tell how big Godzilla is going to be. Is look at the city he's going to. How tall are those buildings?
Right.
He's probably going to be a little bit shorter than the tallest buildings in that city because they always want him to be proportional to the buildings. And so
He's
in
bigger
1950s,
than most of the buildings until he gets to downtown.
right, it's the very tallest
Right.
buildings, and then he's a little bit shorter than those. And so, like, well, how big is the tallest building in like 1950s Tokyo? Probably not much taller than 50 meters. So that's about how tall Godzilla is. And then you get to later ones where you get to like the Monsterverse, where there's skyscrapers over 100 meters tall. Well, Godzilla's 100 meters tall now.
Yes.
Steinjarl?
I think it's
Right?
Steinjarl. I think it's a
Steinjarl. Godzilla, a radioactive monster on the Ark, changing kinds to species? Yeah.
maybe that's like the secret to the rapid post-flood speciation is they spent so
Oh,
long
right.
with Godzilla, and the radiation just induced so many new mutations.
But God designed all those mutations because that also has to be so.
Yes, well, God directed the ionizing radiation entering the gonads of all the animals on the ark to do the right mutations, not the wrong mutations.
Savage Cobra. Savage, what's a Panbo voice? I don't know how to say
That's
the name.
Pan
But Savage Cobra,
Bovicetaceae.
I love what you wrote. AIG and getting the source material wrong. Source material wrong. Name a more iconic combo. Indeed.
Yeah,
Yes.
seriously. By the way,
they
that
always get it
name is
wrong.
specifically designed to irk me, is what Pan
Oh, I
Bovicetaceae
see.
is. Yes.
Okay. Well, I think we should get. Oh, shoot. We got one more snuck in. We need to get back to
Oh,
the
hold on.
thing.
Yeah. When you read
Go
this,
ahead.
I got something else to say.
Okay. Yay. Paul, Dapper, and Arn on Godzilla. What's in the growler tonight, Arn?
I have a local Dallas-Fort Worth brew called Cocytus by Martin House. This is at least 12% ABV, although I think the special brew that I have is a little bit higher than that.
Gee, you know where to get all the high ABV beer.
All right, who wants to see a Godzilla?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on
go for it.
When they were talking about the different movies. I'm not sure which one they're reviewing now because it seems like that they were getting into Godzilla not King of the Monsters is the wrong name because as Dapper Dinosaur mentioned before, the original movie, that Monster Zero was the sequel of this original movie. They had an original movie that introduced Rodan. Rodan was introduced in his own movie, 1956, but Rodan returns to fight alongside Godzilla and Mothra against Ghidorah, and that movie is the one they remade in, I think, 2016. That's the one they called King of the Monsters, but it's not. It's not King of the Monsters, is it? Because the 1956 King of the Monsters, Godzilla's a solo act.
Yeah.
So what was the name of the original one where we learned, or they bring back Rodan and they introduce Mothra? What was the name of that movie?
The three-headed Godzilla versus the three-headed monster.
Godzilla versus the three-headed monster. That's the movie they remade, and obviously they went with King of the Monsters because Godzilla versus the three-headed monster would have sounded stupid.
Yeah, that's a title that doesn't really work in like the 2010s.
Yeah, I do like what they did with Rodan though in that movie.
Yeah.
I don't like a lot of the way that the complete missed opportunities for the new movies, but I do like Rodan like a lot.
One big thing is the Rodan design in King of the Monsters is actually based on a scrapped design for Rodan from Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, in which there was going to be some transition where he becomes Fire Rodan after emerging from a volcano or something like that. And so we had like a whole lot of extra like flame motifs going on, and like the wing membrane was going to be changed. And so they took a lot of that concept art and put it into the Monsterverse, which is why Rodan comes out of the volcano and still has like, like glowing embers all over his body, and the trailing edge of his wing membranes are smoking and whatnot. And so
he looks like he looks like he was also influenced a little bit by the demon in Fantasia.
Yeah, that's actually I actually hadn't thought about that, but I can see that. And yeah, I personally really like the Rodan design from the King of the Monsters, legendary film.
Yeah, that was really good. I'll give him full cred on Rodan being badass.
All right, let's get to some dancing.
I love the sound effects.
Yeah. They have kind of kept Godzilla's.
Oh, it's that moment.
Yeah, they're going to show the dance.
Yeah, which is pretty neat.
This is not, though.
Yep, there it is.
Like, my question is why?
Oh, I know why. So at this point, Godzilla. So when it starts out, right, 1954, Godzilla is a serious movie that is an attempt by Japanese filmmakers to talk about the atomic bombings of Japan without running afoul of the U.S. censors who were still in place in Japan, who were saying, no, you can't just talk about the, war crimes that the United States committed against you in retaliation to your war crimes, because, war crimes for everybody.
Yeah.
And so, they created this monster. They explicitly connected it to the atomic bombing with things like his skin looking like the charred skin of bomb victims, things like that. And then over time, as things like the Rush sequel, Godzilla Raids Again, comes out, and it becomes a little bit more of a slogfest with a different monster rather than sort of a suspenseful, almost horror movie vibe. And it, over time, started getting more and more of a kid thing. Kids were enjoying Godzilla films more than adults were. And so you can start to see a lot more of this with King Kong versus Godzilla, the original one, the first one is in color. And by the time you get to Godzilla versus Monster Zero or Invasion of Astro Monster, which are the same movie, basically the franchise has at this point just gone into, it's now a kid's thing. It is for kids. They're usually trying to keep it to the point where like the parents who are taking their kids to see these movies aren't going to be like just bored out of their skulls. They're trying to doing kind of like the Disney cartoon thing where it's like there are some jokes and some elements that are there for the adults to enjoy so that they're not just going crazy, but it's primarily a kids thing. And this was the first movie that really solidly put Godzilla into this is a kids franchise territory. And that would be the way it would stay for the rest of the Showa era until the reboot in the Heisei era, where we get the, was it 84, 80? I don't remember which year, 82?
Yeah,
Whichever one.
they made a valiant attempt when they brought Raymond Burr back to reprise his original character,
Yeah.
Steve Martin, which
Oh, they called him
I loved
Mr.
it.
Martin because they didn't actually have the rights to call him Steve Martin.
But it's funny because they had the priority, right? It's like Mel Brooks said when about Hedley Lamar. This was 1856. We could sue her.
Yeah,
That's genius. I love that.
so yeah, that is to answers in Genesis question. Yeah, it's because that there had been a long series of moving the series more and more kid friendly, and you actually see that like with things like Son of Godzilla, where Godzilla and his son are on an island, and Godzilla's son is being bullied by bug monsters, and this is like, what's happening right now? It's like it's Godzilla teaching his son to stand up for himself against bullies. Oh, okay, I guess that's a thing.
And I liked that. When I was a kid, I really appreciated those scenes of when I was a kid. The movies were aimed at me as a child, and I appreciated movies like Son of Godzilla and Monster Zero. I did. Of course, as I grew older, I only wanted the horror movie version of it, and there was it's just something about, especially being a boy. We were all about lizards and horrible evil things. And when I once had a Malaysian water monitor, which is a massive lizard. It's the second largest lizard species in the world. The people who gave it to me, they said, we have this lizard, we can't handle it because it hates everything. And you walk into the room and it thrashes and we have to cover it with a blanket so that it doesn't freak out. So you can take it if you want it. And I lifted the blanket and I got to see this massive lizard, and it opened its mouth and hissed at me, and there's strings of venomous saliva that dripped down it just between the jaws, and I looked at this thing and went, you are the most evil thing I've ever seen in my life. I love you.
I mean, they're beautiful lizards.
I had to have it. Unfortunately, it at one point it got on my back porch and it grabbed the aluminum door and bent it open. So I show up with food to feed it, and I see that the back door of our house is bent open. I'm like, oh crap! So he's out, and eventually the police shot him.
Oh,
yeah.
Well,
he was, and that by the way,
the kind of thing they do.
That, by the way, was the only true story in the Weekly World News, because when the Weekly World News reported that story, there was under the headline, "Police do battle with giant prehistoric reptile." And then when there was, I want to say Nightline, but I can't remember what the show was. There was a subsequent show that about the time that Weekly World News went out of business, they had this documentary on the news story. They said, was there anything that you ever checked into to see if any of these stories were true, that you weren't just making everything up? And they said, well, there was this one guy that had this big lizard that the police shot. We knew that one was like, I am the only true story in the Weekly World News.
Congratulations. That's quite the honor.
I think so.
Wow.